You know that feeling when you realize your whole family dynamic has been built on a lie? When everything you thought you knew about the people who raised you suddenly shifts, and you're left standing there wondering how you missed all the red flags. That's exactly where I found myself 3 months ago, staring at empty envelopes that should have contained my engagement party money, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. My name is Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. I've always been what you'd call the responsible one in my family. While my younger brother Jake was out partying through college and bouncing between minimum wage jobs, I was working 2 part-time jobs to pay for my nursing degree. While he was living in mom and dad's basement at 24, playing video games and ordering DoorDash on their credit card, I was saving every penny I could for my future. I thought that's just how families worked. Some people are givers, some are takers, and somehow it all balances out in the end. I was so wrong about that. The story I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about fairness, and about standing up for yourself. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, or if you've ever wondered whether you're being too generous with people who don't appreciate it, this story is for you. And hey, if you're finding value in hearing about real family drama and how to handle it, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to support more stories like this one. My friend Emma always says that sharing these experiences helps other people feel less alone in their own family struggles, and I really hope that's true. So let me take you back to the beginning, to understand how we got to the point where my own mother would steal thousands of dollars from me at what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. Growing up, my parents always made it clear that Jake was the golden child. He was funny, charming, and somehow managed to talk his way out of every consequence. When he crashed Dad's car at 17, it was boys will be boys. When he got suspended from school for cheating, it was he's just bored because he's too smart for his classes. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters, it was he's finding his own path. Meanwhile, when I got a B+ instead of an A in chemistry, I heard about it for weeks. When I wanted to go to a friend's sleepover, I needed to provide references and a detailed itinerary. The double standard was so obvious that even my friends noticed it, but I convinced myself it was just because I was the older sibling, and parents always expect more from the firstborn. By the time I graduated nursing school and started working at St. Mary's Hospital, I had developed what I now recognize as classic oldest child syndrome. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who organized family dinners, who helped my parents with their taxes every year. I was the one they called when they needed someone to watch their house while they went on vacation, or when they needed a ride to the airport, or when they just wanted to complain about their problems. And somehow, I had convinced myself that this was love, that being useful was the same as being valued. Jake, on the other hand, seemed to live in a consequence-free bubble. By the time he was 24, he had been fired from 7 different jobs, had maxed out 3 credit cards that my parents paid off, and had been in 2 car accidents that somehow weren't his fault. He was still living in their basement, still eating their food, still using their Netflix password, and still getting an allowance like he was 12 years old. But whenever I brought up how unfair this seemed, my parents would get defensive and say things like, "Everyone moves at their own pace," and "You can't compare your journey to someone else's." The funny thing is, I wasn't even asking them to stop helping Jake. I was just asking them to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I had worked pretty hard to get where I was, and that maybe I deserved a little recognition for that. But somehow, every conversation about Jake's lack of responsibility turned into a lecture about how I needed to be more understanding and supportive of my brother. This dynamic continued for years, and I hate to admit it, but I enabled it. I gave Jake money when he was between jobs. I covered his portion of the bill when we went out for family dinners. I even co-signed on his lease when he finally moved out of my parents' house, because his credit was so bad that no landlord would rent to him otherwise. I told myself I was being a good sister, but looking back, I was just perpetuating the same system that had made me feel invisible for most of my life. Then I met David. David was a fellow nurse at the hospital, and from the moment I met him, I knew he was different. He was kind, but he also had boundaries. He was generous, but he didn't let people walk all over him. He listened when I told him about my family dynamics, and he didn't try to fix me or tell me I was overreacting. He just said, very quietly, "That doesn't sound fair, Sarah. You deserve better than that." It was the first time in my life that someone had validated my feelings about my family without trying to explain them away or minimize them. David didn't know my parents, didn't have years of history and emotional investment clouding his judgment. He just saw the situation for what it was: unfair. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and during that time, I started to see my family through his eyes. I watched him interact with his own parents, who treated him and his sister with equal respect and affection. I saw how they celebrated his achievements without immediately pivoting to talk about what his sister needed. I saw how they asked him about his life because they were genuinely interested, not because they needed something from him. It was like looking at a completely different species of family, and it made me realize how abnormal my own family dynamic really was. When David proposed last December, I was over the moon. We had been talking about marriage for months, and I knew it was coming, but when he got down on one knee in front of the Christmas tree in my apartment, I still cried like a baby. The ring was beautiful, a simple solitaire that he had saved for months to buy. But what made me cry was the way he looked at me when he asked me to marry him, like I was the most important person in his world, like I mattered. We decided to have our engagement party in March, right after the worst of winter was over, but before everyone got too busy with spring and summer plans. I wanted something small and elegant, maybe 30 people, good food, nice music, a chance for our families to meet and celebrate together. David's parents immediately offered to help with the cost, which was incredibly generous. But I wanted to pay for most of it myself. I had been saving money for years, and this felt like something I wanted to do for us, for our future. My parents seemed excited about the party, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were all on the same page. Mom helped me pick out the venue, a small event space downtown that had exposed brick walls and string lights, exactly the kind of aesthetic I had been dreaming of. Dad offered to handle the music, and Jake even volunteered to help with setup, which should have been my first red flag, but I was so happy that everyone was being supportive that I didn't question it. The guest list was exactly what I had hoped for: my close friends from work, David's family, our college friends, and a few relatives. We sent out invitations 6 weeks in advance, and I was thrilled when almost everyone RSVP'd yes. I spent weeks planning the menu, choosing flowers, and making sure every detail was perfect. This was going to be our night, the official start of our journey toward marriage, and I wanted everything to be special. In the weeks leading up to the party, I noticed that Jake was being unusually attentive. He asked about the guest list, about the timing, about who was coming from out of town. He even offered to help me set up the gift table, which was so unlike him that I actually joked to David about it. Maybe getting engaged is making everyone sentimental, I said. Even Jake is acting like he cares. David laughed, but I could see something in his eyes that I couldn't quite read. Later, I would realize it was concern, but at the time, I was too caught up in wedding planning to pay attention to the subtle warning signs. The day of the party, everything went perfectly. The weather was beautiful. The venue looked exactly like I had envisioned, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. David's parents were charming and funny, and they hit it off immediately with my friends from work. My college roommate flew in from Seattle, and we spent the whole evening catching up and laughing about old times. Even my usually critical Aunt Linda complimented the food and said it was the nicest engagement party she had ever attended. But the best part was watching David work the room. He was so genuinely happy, so excited to introduce me to people, so proud to be my fiancé. Every time I looked across the room and saw him laughing with my friends or deep in conversation with my dad, I felt this warm glow of contentment. This was what I had been waiting for my whole life. Someone who loved me enough to want to blend our lives together completely. As the evening wound down, people started saying their goodbyes and leaving their gifts on the table we had set up near the entrance. It was a beautiful collection of wrapped boxes, gift bags, and cards, and I felt so grateful for everyone's generosity. David and I had registered for a few things, but we had made it clear that we didn't expect gifts. We just wanted people to come and celebrate with us. By 10 o'clock, most of the guests had left, and it was just family and a few close friends helping with cleanup. I was in the kitchen wrapping up leftover food when my mom approached me with a concerned look on her face. "Sarah, honey, I think we need to talk about Jake," she said quietly. I turned to face her, immediately worried. "What's wrong? Is he okay?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. He's been having a really hard time lately. He lost his job last week, and he's behind on his rent. He's been too proud to ask for help, but I'm worried he's going to end up homeless. I felt my heart sink. Even on my engagement night, somehow the conversation was turning back to Jake and his problems. But he was my brother, and I did love him. So I pushed down my disappointment and focused on what she was telling me. "How much does he need?" I asked, already mentally calculating how much I could afford to lend him. "Well, that's the thing," Mom said, looking uncomfortable. "He needs about $1,500 to catch up on rent and cover his expenses until he finds another job. I know it's a lot, but you know how proud he is. He would never ask you directly. $1,500 was a lot of money, especially right after paying for an engagement party. But Jake was family, and if he was really about to be homeless, what choice did I have? "Okay," I said, "I can probably help him out. Let me talk to David and figure out the best way to do it." Mom's face lit up with relief. "Oh, Sarah, you're such a good sister. I knew you would understand. Jake is going to be so grateful." Something about her reaction struck me as odd, but I was tired and emotional from the party, so I didn't think too much about it. I just felt good about being able to help my brother when he needed it. It wasn't until the next morning, when David and I sat down to open our engagement gifts, that I realized something was very wrong. We had moved all the gifts to our apartment the night before, and I was so excited to see what everyone had given us. David made coffee while I sorted through the cards and boxes, organizing them by who they were from so we could write proper thank you notes. But as I started opening the cards, I noticed something strange. Many of the envelopes that should have contained money or gift cards were empty. Not all of them, but enough to make me pause and recount. "David," I called out, "can you come here for a second?" He came over with 2 cups of coffee and sat down next to me on the couch. "What's up?" I held up a handful of empty envelopes. "These cards are all empty, but I watched people put money in them when they congratulated us at the party." David frowned and picked up one of the envelopes. "Are you sure? Maybe they forgot to put the money in, or maybe they're planning to give it to us later." I shook my head. "No. I specifically remember Mrs. Patterson from down the hall telling me she had put $50 in her card. And my cousin Mike definitely said he had given us $100 for our honeymoon fund. These envelopes have been opened and resealed." As we continued going through the gifts, the pattern became clear. Someone had systematically gone through our cards, removed the cash and gift cards, and carefully resealed the envelopes. In total, we were missing about $2,000 in cash gifts. I felt sick to my stomach. Not just because of the money, although that was a significant amount for us, but because someone we trusted had violated our special night. Someone we had invited into our celebration had stolen from us. David was quiet for a long time, just staring at the pile of empty envelopes. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "Sarah, I hate to ask this, but who had access to the gift table last night?" I thought back through the evening, trying to remember who had been near the gifts. The venue staff had been professional and trustworthy. They had worked dozens of similar events. Our friends had been drinking and having fun, but I couldn't imagine any of them doing something like this. David's family barely knew us well enough to take such a risk. But then I remembered something. Jake had volunteered to help with setup, and he had been particularly interested in the gift table. He had asked me multiple times where we wanted it positioned, and he had been one of the last people to leave the venue. "No," I said out loud, not wanting to believe what I was thinking. No, he wouldn't do that. But even as I said it, I knew it was true. Jake had been acting strange for weeks, asking too many questions about the party. My mom had approached me with that story about him needing money just hours after the theft. And Jake had a history of taking shortcuts and making bad decisions when he was desperate. David reached over and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I know this is the last thing you wanted to deal with right now." I started crying then, not just because of the money, but because of what it meant. My own brother had stolen from me on my engagement night. My own mother had probably been in on it, coming to me with that sob story about Jake needing $1,500 right after he had already taken $2,000 from our gift table. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in my chest. I had spent my whole life being the good daughter, the responsible sister, the one who always helped and never asked for anything in return. And this was how they repaid me. But more than that, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that David had to see this side of my family. I was embarrassed that I had been so naive and trusting. I was embarrassed that I had spent years making excuses for behavior that was clearly inexcusable. David held me while I cried, and when I finally calmed down, he said something that changed everything. "You know we have to confront them about this, right? This can't just be swept under the rug." I looked at him surprised. "In my family, we didn't confront people about things like this. We made excuses, we looked the other way, we found ways to rationalize bad behavior. The idea of actually calling Jake and demanding an explanation felt foreign and scary." "I don't know," I said. "What if I'm wrong? What if it wasn't him?" David picked up one of the empty envelopes and examined it closely. "Sarah, look at this. Someone used a letter opener to carefully open this envelope, remove the contents, and then used a glue stick to seal it back up. This wasn't a random theft by a stranger. This was planned and deliberate." He was right, of course. This wasn't some crime of opportunity. Someone had come to our party with the intention of stealing from us, and they had come prepared with the tools to do it. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "I think you should call Jake and give him a chance to explain himself. And if he did take the money, I think you should demand that he return it." The idea of confronting Jake directly made my stomach turn. In my family, I was the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over and made everyone comfortable. I had never directly challenged anyone about their behavior, and I had no idea how to even start. But David was right. This wasn't something I could just ignore. This was theft, plain and simple, and it had happened at one of the most important events of my life. I called Jake that afternoon, and the conversation went exactly as horribly as I had expected. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," I started, my voice shaking. "Did you take money from our gift table last night?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" "Several of our cards were opened and the money was removed. About $2,000 is missing. And you think I took it?" His voice was already getting defensive and angry. "Wow, Sarah. Thanks for the vote of confidence." "I'm not accusing you," I said, although I guess I was. "I'm just trying to figure out what happened. You were one of the last people to leave, and you had access to the gift table all night." "I cannot believe you would even suggest this," Jake said, his voice rising. "I'm your brother, Sarah. I would never steal from you." "Then how do you explain the missing money?" "I don't know. Maybe one of your fancy friends from work decided to help themselves. Maybe the venue staff took it. Maybe you miscounted. But I am not a thief, and I'm insulted that you would even think I was capable of something like this." The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, with Jake getting increasingly angry and defensive, and me getting increasingly frustrated and confused. He never actually denied taking the money, but he made me feel like I was a terrible person for even suggesting it. By the time we hung up, I was crying again, and I felt like somehow I was the one who had done something wrong. David was less than impressed with Jake's response. "He didn't deny it," he pointed out. "He just deflected and made you feel guilty for asking." "Maybe I am wrong," I said. "Maybe it really was someone else. Sarah, think about it logically. Your cousin Mike told you he put $100 in his card. Mrs. Patterson told you she put $50 in hers. You have multiple witnesses who can confirm that there was money in those envelopes. And Jake is the only person who had both the access and the motive to take it." I knew he was right, but I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe that my brother, despite all his flaws, would never steal from me. I wanted to believe that my family, despite all their dysfunction, would never betray me like this. But over the next few days, more evidence emerged. My friend Jennifer mentioned that she had seen Jake near the gift table multiple times throughout the evening, and that he had seemed particularly interested in which cards contained money. My Aunt Linda said she had noticed that Jake left the party abruptly without saying goodbye to anyone, which was unusual for him. Most damning of all, my mom called me 3 days later to follow up on our conversation about Jake needing money. "Have you had a chance to think about helping your brother?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "Mom, I need to ask you something. Did you know that money was stolen from our gift table?" There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean that someone opened our cards and took about $2,000 in cash gifts, and I'm starting to think it was Jake." Another pause, longer this time. Sarah, honey, I think you're letting stress get to you. Maybe you miscounted, or maybe some people forgot to put money in their cards. Jake would never do something like that. Mom, I know there was money in those cards. I watched people put it there. Well, even if some money is missing, that doesn't mean Jake took it. There were a lot of people at that party. Her response confirmed what I already suspected. She knew. She had known all along that Jake had taken the money, and she had come to me with that story about him needing $1,500 as a way to cover for him. She was hoping I would give him money to help, which would essentially be him paying me back with my own money, and everyone could pretend the theft never happened. I felt like I was living in some kind of alternate reality where theft was acceptable as long as it was family doing the stealing, where I was expected to be understanding and forgiving, even when I was the victim. That night, I had a long conversation with David about what we should do. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to write off the $2,000 as the cost of learning what my family really thought of me. But David helped me see that this wasn't just about the money. If you let this slide, he said, you're teaching them that it's okay to steal from you. You're teaching them that you don't value yourself enough to stand up for what's right. And you're teaching them that there are no consequences for their actions. He was right, of course. This wasn't just about $2,000. This was about respect and boundaries and whether I was going to spend the rest of my life being taken advantage of by people who were supposed to love me. So I decided to do something I had never done before. I decided to hold my family accountable for their actions. The next morning, I sat down at my computer and wrote up an itemized invoice. I listed every card that had been opened, every amount that had been stolen, and every witness who could confirm that money had been in those envelopes. I calculated the total amount stolen, added a line for emotional distress, and included a note about the impact this theft had on what should have been a joyful celebration. The total came to $2,300, $2,000 for the stolen money and $300 for the emotional damage of having my engagement party violated by my own family. I printed out the invoice on official letterhead from my nursing agency, put it in a formal business envelope, and mailed it to Jake's apartment with a note that said, "Payment due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in legal action." I also sent a copy to my parents with a note that said, "Since you seem to think this behavior is acceptable, I'm holding you equally responsible for Jake's actions. You have 30 days to make this right." I won't lie. Sending those invoices was terrifying. I had never confronted my family about anything, and I had no idea how they would react. But I also felt something I had never felt before when dealing with them: empowered. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for myself and demanding to be treated with respect. The reaction was swift and explosive. Jake called me within 2 hours of receiving the invoice, screaming about how I was destroying the family and being completely unreasonable. He denied taking the money, but he also said that if he had taken it, it would have been justified because I owed him for all the times I had acted superior to him. My parents called an hour later, and it was somehow even worse. My mom cried and said I was tearing the family apart over money. My dad accused me of being vindictive and petty, and said I was using my engagement party as an excuse to attack Jake. But the worst part was when my mom said, "Sarah, honey, even if Jake did take some money, you have to understand that he's desperate. He's your brother. Family is supposed to help each other." "Help each other," I repeated, my voice rising. "Mom, this isn't helping. This is stealing. Jake didn't ask for help. He stole from me at my engagement party. There's a difference." "You're being dramatic," my dad chimed in. "It's just money. You'll make more money. But you only have one family." That statement hit me like a slap in the face. "Just money?" I said. "Dad, that money represented dozens of people who cared enough about David and me to celebrate our engagement. That money was going toward our honeymoon, our future together. And Jake stole it. He violated one of the most important nights of my life, and you're telling me to just get over it because it's just money?" "You're being selfish," my mom said, and I could hear her crying. "Jake is struggling, and instead of helping him, you're attacking him." "I am not attacking him," I said, my voice getting louder. "I am asking him to return money that he stole from me. How is that attacking him?" But it was clear that we were never going to see eye to eye on this. In their minds, Jake was the victim, struggling, desperate, deserving of understanding and forgiveness. I was the bad guy for expecting him to face consequences for his actions. The phone calls continued for days. Jake would call to alternate between denying he took the money and explaining why he deserved it. My parents would call to guilt-trip me about being mean to my brother. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out to tell me I was overreacting and being too harsh. It was like the entire family had mobilized to defend Jake's right to steal from me without consequences. But David stood by me through all of it. Every time I started to doubt myself, every time I wondered if maybe I was being too harsh, he reminded me of the facts. Someone had stolen from us on our engagement night. Jake was the only person with the access and motive to do it. And my family's response was to protect him and blame me. "You're not crazy," he would say when I started to question my own judgment. "You're not being dramatic."